Hey there, everybody. It's me, Chris Herman, here for another episode of On Deck. Today, my guest is John Linn. John is the marketing director for the Funky Buddha Brewery right here in nearby Oakland Park, Florida. Very interesting conversation. Learned a lot about craft beer, what it's like to take a small local brand and take it to a larger regional brand. We talk about food and beverage and the local arts community. Very, very enjoyable conversation. So without further ado, here we go. It's John Linn. All right, well, then let's begin, shall we, John?
All right.
John, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing great.
Good. All right. Well, for everybody, welcome John Linn. John, you are the Director of Marketing for the Funky Buddha Brewery right here in Oakland Park.
That's right. That's right.
This is the first time that we've had the opportunity to meet. So first, let me say welcome.
Thank you.
And you are on deck, my friend.
I love it. Thank you for having me here. This is just an awesome space and, really cool, to sit down and talk with you and, like-minded kind of creatives here in South Florida. I love it.
I'm really glad to have you here. And, we got to know each other a little bit before we started, and we're talking a little bit about your history with the company, but we'll go through that a little bit again. So let's just start off by talking about, the Funky Buddha and what it is and a little bit of the history behind the company and your involvement.
Yeah, sounds good. So Funky Buddha Brewery began really as like a small bar and hookah lounge in Boca Raton on Federal Highway in 2007, way back. So we've got somewhat of a long history. A few years in, we were really specializing in craft beer and decided to expand and start brewing our own beer. And that was transformative, right? Mm-hmm. Like our founder, Ryan, is a student of craft beer and of flavor and just like almost like a mixologist, right? With his ability to kind of, create products. And so he started creating products that were, based on this kind of like imaginative ideas of recreating flavor experiences and, kind of cueing in on flavor memory using natural ingredients. And so that's what really kind of catapulted us to, some popularity and gave us the ability to kind of expand from there. We built the brewery in 2013 in Oakland Park. We're one of the first craft brewers in South Florida and the first in Fort Lauderdale, Fort Lauderdale proper.
Right.
It was kind of a rocket ship from there. I mean, we just, expanded throughout the state and grew. But, we're all about kind of unleashing our consumers' imaginative side through like flavorful beverages, through, interesting experiences and kind of creativity. So you see that kind of on our packaging, the way we kind of talk about the brand, our programs, and in the tap room, you get that experience too. So
yeah, there's definitely, for those that have been, they know, and those that haven't, the brand, there is a, now that you say it, there is a very high level of creativity, right? Like even down to the name, like the name Funky Buddha is a very, it's an interesting, it's fun, it's kind of quirky and a little bit, it's outside, right?
For sure.
And when you look at the different beers and beverages that you guys put out, every one of them has a high level of creativity in the name, the design, the packaging, and then even the experience here. I mean, what has been built over in Oakland Park, I mean, it's very impressive. It's a very big, bar, restaurant, tap room, brewery experience altogether that's impressive, and it has been really, I would say, kind of the anchor to help other businesses in that area grow as well too, correct?
It has been. I mean, Oakland Park has transformed over the years we've been there since 2013, and we like to call it the source of the funk. It's like where all things funky kind of come from, and whether that's in the brewery, right, which is the ultimate source, or in the tap room where we just kind of cultivate those vibes, right, like those funky vibes. We like to say, use the term funky spirit, like unleashing your funky spirit a lot. And, I think that's something that's very positive, right? It's needed nowadays, right? Because it's very easy, I think, to get bogged down by, the weight of everything going on. But this idea that we can kind of rise above it, we can unleash our kind of inner selves and,
right.
Become, more positive and look at the world in a new light, I think is amazing.
So I was telling you a little bit before, I went to school in Colorado, and in Colorado, I was definitely introduced into more of, at the time we would have defined it more as a hippie kind of lifestyle,
For sure.
and certainly the term funk and funky was it was very much a part of the lifestyle out there. And there was always, a creative vibe, and there was always an element of positivity. And, there was the sort of beginning movement in that area of microbrewing. And it's so cool to see it here, right? Because I always found that to be, a very open-minded and creative type of environment. And you guys have, created that here in Florida. And so I'd be curious to go back to, and the owners are Ryan and
Casey Sense are the founders.
Okay, they're the founders. So what's their history a little bit that motivated them to build a place in Boca called the Funky Buddha?
Yeah, well, Ryan, I think has always had a passion for food and beverage. He sold ads in CityLink magazine, right? Now defunct, right? This is alt weekly as part of the Sun Sentinel. And it's funny because he and I share that heritage too, in that I worked for the Village Voice Media Group, or New Times, for 4 years as a restaurant and food critic. So we shared that in common. Yeah. And that's initially what brought us together. I think we met at a very early on beer trading and tasting group, at a bar in Delray. And just kind of hit it off, And then Casey is very entrepreneurial. He started a couple of companies. He worked for Motorola, and so kind of experienced that side of the kind of corporate life. And so I think they bring a really well-rounded kind of skill set to the brewery. With Casey kind of thinking about things from a business lens, and Ryan kind of prioritizing that creativity and
right.
So to kind of go back what you were mentioning about South Florida, I think so many times I think here in South Florida we're like a transient place, right? We're a place that people come in from elsewhere, and you talk about great creative kind of weird and fun cities like Boulder or Portland or Austin, right? And they've got a culture around it, right? And I think growing up here in South Florida, you had to kind of create your own, and
yeah.
So that's what was happening, I think, in early, let's call it 2010 to 12, where we were conceiving, what Funky Buddha could be. It was we were meeting up at beer meetup groups. We were doing pub crawls. We were it was very grassroots, right? And it was this idea of we're going to create this culture that we want. And now you look at craft beer, and I think it's one example of, the energy and the excitement that South Florida has. And you're seeing the things that are inherently Florida also manifesting in that, which I think it's giving us as Floridians a creative expression that, maybe an outlet for that creative expression, right? That's different. I grew up in New Jersey, but I've lived in South Florida now for the better part of 25, 26 years. Are you born and raised here down in South Florida? I was born in Denver, right?
That's right. Okay, yeah.
And then I moved here though when I was really young with my family, so I'm a Floridian.
Okay,
for sure.
So the point that I was getting at is you and I have both been able to witness what I would say over the last 10 to 15 years has been a massive creative. Resurgence wouldn't be the right word. It's been an explosion of creativity across South Florida. When I came to South Florida in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, South Beach was South Beach, Fort Lauderdale was Fort Lauderdale, and they both had their own kind of vibe, but each location kind of was the same. And what I meant by that, when you went to Miami and Miami Beach, every restaurant kind of had this vibe, right? It was the Miami Beach chic thing, right? And Fort Lauderdale had a little bit more of a little different flavor, maybe a little bit more conservative, right? But there wasn't this unique pocket neighborhood. You didn't have this explosion of warehouses with art and interesting businesses that you would see in a Boulder or a Portland or an Austin, right? These more creative upstarts, where now it's everywhere, right? Yeah. And you guys have been a big part of that. And when you look across the South Florida landscape, the amount of creativity that we're able to see on a daily basis is really, it's inspiring.
It is, and I think Renaissance maybe is a word that like kind of comes to mind,
Good
right?
one.
But what I think you're seeing too now, which is great, is it's not just kind of like a borrowing of creative. I think that was also something that happened in Florida a lot. Like at least my kind of experience growing up and then being a young adult was like, we're just kind of like behind because we're just borrowing from New York and we're just borrowing from other cities, right? Now I think this flavor of Florida, right, is really coming out. Mm-hmm. And you see that in these neighborhoods, in these pockets, right, where, we're embracing, kind of the weird, wild nature of Florida and, other breweries are doing it. There's cool coffee shops and restaurants and eateries and just, places where people can go and kind of like stretch their thinking a bit in all these different pockets and it's happening. And I think, we got to do our best to kind of continue to foster that, and I think, you see that there's a lot of hope for that, right? There's a lot of hope for people to kind of continue to, build something that's theirs, right? But uniquely Florida.
Yeah. Let's take this back into craft brew, right? Craft beer. We've talked about this. There's been sort of like two waves of the explosion of craft beer in the United States, I'll defer to you on that for more expertise. But what is it about craft beer that draws creative people, right? I mean, because it's a very passionate community, and there's an enormous amount of creativity. So what is it that brings this together? And then how do you guys harness that to create what you create?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can speak personally, and like creating a product is, that you then see people kind of consume and enjoy, and you see their kind of the light of their eyes open when they try it. I mean, that is like its own reward. Like that is the most rewarding thing, I think, for creative expression. I think why it manifests in craft beer is just because, the rules, and the guardrails sort of came off, right? I think early on, and you talked about, there's been a couple of like kind of surges of craft beer, like late '90s. There were brew pubs all over. There were, restaurants like Hops, right? And it was kind of becoming bigger, right? But then I think it just kind of fizzled a bit, right? Because there was lack of a distinction. There was a lack of kind of consumer awareness for what it was that craft beer was bringing. And as craft grew, and kind of like, I'll say like in Florida, certainly in the early kind of 2010s, the idea was like the guardrails are off, like we don't have to just make, brown ales and pale ales and kind of traditional, beers from around the world, or just brew another lager, right?
Right.
We're gonna make, a beer that tastes like breakfast in a glass. It's got maple syrup, bacon, coffee, you name it, right? We're gonna do something that tastes like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. We're gonna do things that maybe sound weird, but they get you to stop and think and go like, oh man, that's crazy. And when you try it, I think if you can execute it, right, that's the key. Then you can really change some minds. How
long does it take? Let's use one of these as an example. Okay,
sure.
Let's do the breakfast in a beer, if you will.
Yeah.
From the time you guys say, okay, yeah, let's do something like this. I mean, has one of the guys already been kind of working on it a little bit to create the flavor first? It's Absolutely. Not like you're like, hey, let's do this. Okay, now we start. They're bringing something along that says, I think this fits this description.
Yeah, we became known for doing this, as I mentioned. Like Ryan had this kind of culinary palate, really wanted to create more than beer that was more than the sum of its parts, right? Not just like kind of put these ingredients together and go like, all right, that's good enough. So I remember, back in the lounge days, kind of going in and hanging out with Ryan, and he was developing one beer in particular that I kind of alluded to. It was like no crust, right? It's called no crust because it's the idea that like you want to drink this beer and it's going to take you back to when you had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in your childhood and your mom cut the crust off, right? And gave it to you, and you're like, so to be successful as a beer, right? It's got to evoke that memory, but then it's also got to be drinkable, right? It's got to be good. It's got to be something you're going to come back to,
right? And
so I remember sitting down with Ryan, and Ryan had, it had to be like 10 versions of this beer, right, in front of, on the counter in front. And he's like, all right, I want you to try these and tell me what you think, right? And he would just do this with everyone, like himself, but also seek opinions and, really try to perfect it. So I equate what Ryan does around the brewery to like being like a master blender for a distillery, right?
Okay.
Where you are seeking a flavor profile, you're seeking that balance, but also to kind of create this flavor experience. and it takes a lot of tinkering. It takes a lot of like trial and error. Like nothing, I would say nothing really. It's very rare that things get done right the first time, right? But you're going to try it, and you're gonna. And I think obviously he's amazingly talented. So as you kind of go, like, yeah, he can create things and know that, all right, this is going to work. But I mean, yeah, experimentation, constant experimentation to make sure that you get it right, I think is key.
Are there there's got to be some funny moments though through the process, right? Where somebody's onto a really different or unique idea, and some of the executions are great, and some you're just like, oh.
Yeah. I mean, they're not all winners, right? Sometimes you gotta try something and fail to learn a little bit more. There was probably, I guess the one that sticks out in my mind the most is Ryan wanted to make like a Bloody Mary style beer, and like the tomato juice like just wasn't working in the beer, we were all kind of like, yeah, this is not it, like,
not happening.
But that's what they do in the brewery, and that's what the production staff do. They try things, it doesn't always work. They're not afraid to dump something out if it's not working, right? And just be very creative about how to execute it, right? There's no one right way.
What are some of the surprises for you guys? Because you've launched a lot of different beverage products, right? Are there any that you think of over the years that either you thought were going to be a hit that people didn't adopt to as much, or ones that you weren't so sure, and then it's just like people just loved it?
Well, I mean, our best-selling beers, right, are our Floridian, which is a wheat beer, and Hop Gun IPA, right? Two insanely popular styles. One is refreshing and built for Florida, right, and the other is like very full flavor and gives you that kind of hoppy, experience that IPA lovers crave. So we early on decided like those are going to be what we focus on, and we're going to build these other brands around them, right? And we're going to use those brands as kind of a way. You think about like certain kind of maybe staple brands like driving trial and drawing people deeper. Well, we did kind of the opposite, where we took these kind of out there wild beers like Maple Bacon Coffee Porter, and a beer we made called Last Snow, which is like almost like an Almond Joy in a glass, and we use those as a way to open people's minds and get them into the brand. And then they started drinking Floridian and Hop Gun from
Really?
there. So it's kind of a little bit of the opposite. So to go back to your question, like, did we have beers that we thought were going to be hits? I mean, yeah, we've launched beers, and then, over the years, maybe realized that, okay, that we got to pivot, we got to try new things. And I think inherently, this space, the beverage space, is very innovation driven. It's very driven by new news. And so that's part of like the life cycle. But what has remained a constant is that Floridian and Hop Gun, and what they stand for emotionally has endured and grown, right? And so as we make new products, as we kind of develop new beers and new recipes, I think we've got two things that I think really work for us. One is that we've got the space in which we can go right from our tank to the consumer, and we can learn what they think right away, right? So you can put something on tap in the tap room and know, I would say within a couple of weeks, like, is this a winner,
right?
Or is it not, right? So that tap room is a lot of functions.
How great to be able to like, you get your own like focus group right there.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a huge strength. And then then comes the commercialization side, right? And there's I think it's having good insights and knowing where the business is going, having a real strength of the business and a following of the consumer. And then you got to try to build a brand that really hits on that white space. So they haven't all worked, but I think we've had enough successes. Recently, like our seltzer line, is probably one of our bigger successes from an innovation standpoint.
Yeah, let's talk about that. What's as with any industry, there are trends and shifts in trends. What's happening in the beverage industry, and how are you guys moving along with that?
Yeah, the beverage industry is very interesting. It's very the consumer experience is constantly changing. It's tumultuous. We want to follow the consumer, right? And walk. I would say walk with them, right? Is really the ideal place to be. So seltzer became really popular, I would say 3 years ago, and I think we've maybe all seen like the viral White Claw videos and stuff like that. That I think really kind of catapulted it. But I think what that experience was all about was this desire for better for you. Consumers were shifting to, want something that didn't weigh them down, that, they could kind of enjoy themselves, but, felt lighter, felt healthier, maybe better for you, I want to say, not healthier, right?
Right.
And so that's what drove it initially. What's happening now in the space, though, is like consumers have evolved there, and they've gone, okay, I want that, but I also want flavor. And, flavor is having a resurgence now. So now people, they want more. And so it's finding that balance of like, all right, we want to give consumers more flavor, but like we still have to be cognizant of like calories, carbs, like what are people going for, right? So
right.
The consumer experience is constantly changing. It's constantly evolving.
Is there any internal hand wringing, when you've gotten into the business, built and established your business as a microbrewer, successful regional microbrewer of beer, and then all of a sudden you say, well, the market is shifting. Do we just stay put as this, right? Or do we, evolve? And is there sort of a sense of, if you evolve into, seltzer-oriented drinks, is there any feeling of like, we're kind of betraying our roots to do this,
Yeah, I think, so I think there are a couple things that play in our favor. One, because we built the brand on imagination and kind of creativity and like seeking new experiences. I think our consumers are much more willing to go along for the ride. They're like, okay, all right, we feel
you didn't name the company Only Beer.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Like, shit, no, what do we do?
Yeah. I think the other factor, the nature of the industry is that, you have to evolve, right? You got to constantly be evolving. And in any industry as a business, like you can't stay stagnant.
Right.
So I think those two things, really enabled us to kind of think about seltzer and say like, okay, we can enter this space, right? But also I think like we really thought deeply about how can we enter it and add value? How can we do something that's different? So for us, it was like, all right, we're going to premiumize the ingredients. Like we're not going to bring out like a product that's made with like neutral grain spirits distilled down and stabilized with a bunch of preservatives. We're going to do a cane sugar and agave base, right? And it's going to taste great. And we think that that's like a hallmark of our brand. Like
right.
It doesn't have that aftertaste. Consumers are always telling us like, man, this tastes so clean. It tastes so good. And we're like, yeah, we're using good ingredients. And then the other thing is just having a unique perspective on flavor, something that's rooted in Florida, but also rooted in our kind of imaginative ability to combine flavors. So, tropical mango guava is like our lead like flavor within our packs, and consumers try and they're just like, wow, this tastes like no other seltzer I've ever had. So I think finding that distinction point, then we talk to our consumers, I remember pretty early on in that experience, calling on our consumers, finding out which ones were interested in seltzer and which ones were not, surveying them about, their thoughts on us entering that space. And overwhelmingly, we saw like, yeah, bring it on. Like we're ready for it. Like people were not, they were not like, yeah, don't do that. It's going to dilute the brand. They were like, yeah, we want Funky Buddha to fit more occasions and more needs that we have.
Right. How has your, growth and success in Oakland Park, helped to contribute to other businesses be successful? Because, you guys are located where you're located, right? And I used to, when we first took this agency over, we were literally we were on Prospect, like right off of Andrews on Prospect. Okay. So just literally right around the corner. And so you guys weren't there yet, and none of the other restaurants were really there. But now there's like, there's an area, a community, and forgive me because I've lived more in Dade County than in Broward, so I'm not going to say the right things or list the right businesses, but you've definitely had a spillover effect into that area for other people to come in and succeed as well too, correct?
Yes, and I think there's got to attribute it, I think, to the vision of the city of Oakland Park. And that was part of the big reason that Casey and Ryan decided like this is the spot for us. Mm-hmm. It was the building we went into was an old Sears distribution center, and it had been vacant for like 12 years, right? So like it was a blank slate. Like when we moved in, we could stand at one side and look to the other, and like, there was nothing in there, right? So that was kind of a cool opportunity to build it. But then we also had the city of Oakland Park, which was like, they knew that for the success of Oakland Park, we have to build a downtown. We've got to build a culinary arts district, a place that people can come to and enjoy their lives, right, and want to live here and work here and play here. So I think their vision, combined with our ability to kind of like, we said, yeah, we can be a draw, we can be an anchor. Because I think people will travel for a brewery, right? They'll come in for a brewery, but then also it's this, a bar, inherently is a place for the community to come and, unwind and kind of be themselves and like relax after, their days and just come as they are. And so that ability to be an anchor business, I think, helped draw people to the area, let people see what was going on in Oakland Park. And then slowly we started to see places build up around us, and that just kind of builded. That built the sort of scene there. And I remember pretty early on, we were looking at like some real estate listings in the area. Maybe this was like 2 years in or something like that. And like the real estate listing, like right at the top said like, great house, 3-2, blah, 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 steps from Funky Buddha. And we were like, all right, awesome. We did it,
Right.
So, yeah, I think, we were able to come in and be an anchor, and the city had a great vision. And now Oakland Park is exploding. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, there's, probably 700 new residential units coming in. There's a couple of big projects, including a downtown redevelopment project. We're talking about a train station, right downtown, walkable, shoppable, mixed use spaces. It's all coming together.
That's so cool, right? To be a cornerstone to that piece of development.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about, we were talking earlier, you guys, you start off, as a bar, craft beer bar and hookah lounge, and then you start brewing, then you come here and establish strong, independent, creative business. And then as many businesses get to a certain size, of course, you become on the radar of larger companies looking to add to their portfolio of brands, of which you guys have gone through that process. And tell us a little bit more about what it was like to go from being an independent business into being part of a larger brand. Certainly there's a lot of upside on that, and there's probably some hand-wringing at time to time.
Yeah. It was so first off, I think we really had to do it. And you I know we were talking before, you look at the landscape of craft beer, and independence, first of all, and kind of that revolutionary spirit is like pretty integral to like the story of craft beer. But what was happening, I think, particularly like, let's call it around 2016, maybe 2015, is that you started seeing craft brewers sell to larger beverage companies all over the country, and particularly in states like Florida, Texas, California, Colorado, right, where they were, big states both for craft beer and for kind of consumer experience. So we knew we were at this kind of stage where we had grown several years, and, the next stage was going to take a lot. It was going to take a big investment. It was going to take, kind of putting the business at risk, in some ways. And also, by virtue of what was going on in the industry, like you got to kind of have an ally. You got to have a way, to kind of preserve your route to market. So I think when we ended up being acquired by Constellation Brands in 2017, the industry was already used to this idea, right? I think we had grown so fast, and I don't want to pat ourselves on the back too much, but we had a pretty polished product and way to go to market, and so I don't think consumers were like surprised that it had happened to us.
Right.
By that point, they were pretty used to this idea that craft beer. Your craft beer brand that you knew and loved, they're gonna have to sell eventually. And it's you could look at the landscape in Florida, and every major brewery in Florida is owned by another company now. Well, and that's
the pathway for many small to mid-sized businesses. Because number one, you start off essentially with a passion project, right? You achieve some level of success. But, getting to that quote unquote next level, it's not easy, right? If you've bootstrapped yourself, or say you have some local investment, whatever, you can get to a certain point. But, if you're looking to be a larger regional or national brand, you're probably not going to get there without, being part of a larger organization that's been there, done it, helped guide a bunch of other brands, and help show you the pathway to what it is that you think that you want to be or what you can achieve.
It's part of the American dream too, right? It's part of the reason you build a business, right? Is you obviously you have a creative vision, you want to do something unique and contribute in a unique way, and then you get to a point where in order to keep doing that, you've got to ally yourself. You've got to, and it happens in every space in every business and part of the country. I think the reason that the light gets shined on craft beer for this is because, again, craft beer was built on this idea of independence and kind of being this revolutionary counterpoint to mass-produced beer, right? And that was such a big part of the story, right? Not from one brewery, but from the thousands out
all
there.
All of them.
Yeah, from all of them.
Just about.
So when it happens, there's this collective like shock, like, oh my God, I can't believe they did this. But like every brewer in the country was like, man, we hope we get to that size one day where we can be acquired.
Yeah, well, sure, because it's, it's tough, I mean, it's tough running a business. It's tough doing it independently, without a doubt. And I know that firsthand. But I also understand the consumer and or the business owner's perspective, because we've all seen a lot of really great brands that the quality, everything about the brand was fantastic. Then they get acquired, and not right away, but slowly over time, it just starts to dilute, right? And that brand just becomes another logo on that big company's sheet of companies that they own, right? And they find ways to cut costs, find efficiencies, a little bit here, a little bit there. And that really special, unique brand sometimes ends up losing what was so special about it. And I think that's why people have always been a little bit, suspicious about it, because we've all seen that,
Yeah, I think the good news for us is that, we've, Casey, Ryan, myself, and so many of the amazingly talented people that have, been with us over the years are still there.
That's
Ryan is in the brewery every day, right? Like he is living that. He's constantly, still testing and tasting. We had our 9-year anniversary last weekend, right? It was an amazing event, and it was punctuated by I think they did our production team did 40 new beers, all new, probably never been done before, right? And just this amazing collection of products, and they were all so good, So I don't worry about that as much when I know that we've still got the talented people and the desire and the passion.
That's the difference. It always comes down to people. It always is about the people. I mean, if everybody took a check and headed out into the sunset, you got a different story. But when you've got the heart and soul of the business still there every day, that's what makes a difference.
I'm surrounded by people on my team and then throughout the brewery that have been at the brewery for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, right? And that, hey, they've been dedicating their passions all this time. And the really amazing, rewarding thing of what we did and where we went to with Constellation is that now they all have better quality of life. They've got a health insurance. They're cared for in a very unique way. And so I think it lets everybody kind of breathe easier, knowing we can do what we want to do and we can live our lives and sustain that.
John, as marketing director, what are some of the things that you've learned? What's worked, what's not? I mean, I take it you were not marketing director for a craft brewery before this.
No.
Right? So there was a lot of learn on the job, let's call it on the job experience. Tell me a little bit about that.
It's been the most amazing, let's call it 9+ years of my life of learning, right? And I think for me, there are 2 things that are super imperative in my career, and that's continuing to learn and the ability to be creative. And I can say without a doubt, unequivocally, that I have learned something new every day, of my time at Funky Buddha. And it started with, maybe smaller things, right? But some of those were really impactful learnings that I learned early on. And then it continues. It continues now, I feel people like brands, they constantly evolve, right? And I feel very fortunate to have been able to evolve and change and grow and just learn over the years.
How do you, and this is more my own curiosity to learn, how do you market beer? How do you market, particularly the Funky Buddha?
Sure.
How do you go to market, and what are the things that you do?
So I think when you're dealing with kind of smaller brands, and certainly this was our case early on, it's really about meeting the consumer at the point of sale. It's about, kind of meeting them at retail. It's about driving trial, right? You got to get people to try your product. And then pushing enough distribution and availability that you can be there when they're making a decision. So for us, it's really about, sampling, getting out into the community, doing community events, aligning ourselves with like-minded companies and charities and partners, I think it's also about, kind of just crystallizing your vision of what you are and what you aren't, right? So every time you do show up, that consumer has a consistent idea of who you are. So over the years, we've also started to do things like, try to build more awareness, right? Like our distribution gets to a level where we're like, okay, now we're ready to build some more awareness, to build, kind of positive associations with the brand. So we started doing things like advertising, digital, heavily digital. But here in South Florida, we do, some traditional media. We've done out of home, we've done radio, we've done TV a little bit. And so I think it depends on, where you are and kind of what markets you're focusing on. But, I would say it runs the gamut from traditional advertising to doing things a little bit more nimbly. And ultimately, I think getting liquid to lips is probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, right. I mean, so I would imagine that it starts off very grassroots. I mean, you're bringing people into your experience. You're giving them a great experience. Then you start participating in other festivals and whatever, things are outdoor things that are going on where you guys can set up and say, here's our product, right?
Yeah.
You're bringing more people in your world. Then you're working on the distribution. Okay, here's some shops or bars or restaurants that are likely to be a good place for us to go, right? So it's just like, is it this constant wave of like grassroots, get a little more distribution, get a little more brand awareness?
Yeah.
More grassroots, more distribution, bigger brand awareness, and boom, 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 boom.
Yeah, we're still in that phase, I think, as mature as we are as a Florida or South Florida brand. We're still in this phase where we're like, if you kind of look at like the growth of brands is like a 3-phase growth. Like you got your kind of setting the foundations, right? Then you've got your kind of like ascent up. And then you've got like, okay, we've reached that plateau. Like we're still very much in the ascent up, like we're not at the plateau yet. We're a big brand, certainly in South Florida, top 5 craft brand, top 5 seltzer brand, but we've got a ways to go. And that starts with, creating availability, right? Both like in terms of distribution and then mental availability, people being able to say, oh, Funky Buddha.
Right.
And then just driving that trial.
Who are some of the other big craft brands down here?
Craft in Florida is mostly dominated by national brands because it is a chain-driven state. Like it's very chain-driven. You think about where people go to buy beer, whether it's Publix or Total Wine, Walmart, Whole Foods, right?
Right.
We're very chain-driven. That's the case on both like the retail off-premises side as well as like where you go to drink and eat, right? It's a lot of chain restaurants. So yeah, national craft brands are very strong in Florida. Brands like Sierra Nevada and New Belgium, are very strong here. We have also another really big Florida brand called Cigar City, out of Tampa, and I think we think of them as like colleagues, right? Because we've grown together, but they're a big brand. They were acquired by Monster energy drink recently.
No way.
Yeah, and their whole group.
So
you've got I think you've got them and us as kind of like the largest 2 locals, and then there's a lot of national
brands coming in. Okay, all right. Because I was going to say I didn't think that there was any other actual local creators down here.
There's
of your size.
Of our size, no, but there are a ton of amazingly creative, awesome craft breweries throughout South Florida that are doing unique things, amazing things. I mean, I'd give some shout outs to folks like Invasive Species. That's a former brewer of ours that went and started that with some other local guys. Awesome beers. Three Sons, in Davie, another, Ordania, another amazing brewer. Winwood is another one in Miami, well known, good friends with them and those folks. But there's I lost count of how many there are. There's probably 60 plus in South Florida.
You mentioned earlier that you guys are really, focused on being, a large regional brand, right? So how do you, when you look at the geography, are we talking Florida, Georgia, Alabama? Like what does that mean when you're trying to define that strategy?
Yeah, first up, I mean, we there's still runway for us in the state of Florida, right? Florida is a huge tourist destination. There's a ton of people that live here. It's one of the biggest, most populous states in the country. It's a huge beer market, right? So we still have runway in Florida. That's our number one goal, is to continue to grow in Florida. But yeah, you can find our seltzer products in Georgia, Alabama, North and South Carolina, probably up through, I'd say Virginia is where we're sold. So yeah, it's, regionally, I think the ambitions are like, let's build a foothold. We've become a relevant and known craft brand over the years because of like the special beers we do that people seek out.
Right.
And so that does give us an ability to kind of draw in customers elsewhere. But, Florida is still like our biggest focus. It's our biggest opportunity.
That's so cool. John, let's shift to you a little bit, if we may. Let's back up. Tell me your history a little bit. How did you find your way into, the creative and marketing world, if you will?
I've got a varied history, and I often joke with my friends, but I firmly believe this. I've been so fortunate to have the best, most awesome jobs that I could have possibly imagined. Right? I think everything I've done has been. For me, it's always been driven, again, by creativity. Where can I be creative? What can I contribute from that perspective? But I went to school for graphic design. I started as a graphic designer. I worked for a software company in downtown Fort Lauderdale that actually produced video games.
Okay.
And so my, kind of first big projects were working on video games to be released for Xbox and PlayStation and GameCube.
No way.
Yeah, it was really
it a sleep
awesome.
under your desk kind of deal?
Yeah, we had it was a lot of work. Yeah, it was a lot of work. It was a small staff. What our model was is we would find games in Japan and we would find games in Europe and we would localize them and bring them to the United States. So I got some amazing opportunities early on to like go to Tokyo and go to London and just travel and see new experiences. And it was actually in Tokyo where I realized that my love for food and beverage was real, and it was like a huge passion because I was blown away by the food I had in Tokyo, the experiences, just how different life was there.
My wife and I went to Tokyo 6 years ago. Oh, we love Japan. We were there for like 2 weeks and we had an amazing time.
It's an incredible place, and it's so different culturally, right, from your experience here. That it just opens your eyes.
Yes.
So got to do that, and I did that for several years, and then I decided to go back to school because I became very interested in not just like design, but like, why are we doing these things? Like, what's the reasons behind them? What's the strategic reasons? So I went back for communications and marketing and really kind of focused there. Mm-hmm. And then coming out of that, I did some traveling again, went to Europe and I studied abroad for a little bit. And then I came back and I decided that, I was going to get into writing. And it just kind of happened. When I went back, I went to FAU and went back to school there, and I got involved in like the school newspaper as the old guy in class.
No
and I was like 25, and but I was like, I really love to write, and a job with the Village Voice Media Group just kind of fell into my lap. My professor and kind of head of the newspaper was like, hey, we got this opportunity. Think you should, think about it. So I went there and I started writing classified ads and music ads for the New Times. And just
stimulating.
Yeah. It was, sometimes you got to take a step back to go forward.
That's right. Been there, done that.
So I did that, and then eventually became the paper's restaurant critic and food critic. Managed a stable of writers. Launched the paper's first food blog, Clean Plate Charlie. That was me. That was my aunt used to call me when I was a kid because I always finished my plate, like every scrap of food.
Right.
Clean Plate Charlie. So. So I did that, and that was an amazing experience. But I realized that journalism, probably wasn't the end-all, be-all for me. And it was, again, more about the ability to be creative. But it taught me a lot about writing, copywriting. And then at the time, I got really interested in the booming craft beer industry. I had met some people. I had interviewed some people down here and thought, well, maybe this is a place that I can kind of look at. And so I called up a guy that I had interviewed named Adam Fine. And Adam is the founder of Fresh Beer, which was an early beer distributor. And Adam started Fresh Beer purely because he had also been a brewer and started a beer called Native Brewing Company. And at the time, I think it was like maybe early 2000s when he first developed Native, like no distributor wanted the product. So Adam's like, well, in the craft beer, like revolutionary spirit, like, screw this, I'm gonna start my own distributor.
Right.
So he did. And he was eventually acquired by a larger distributor. And at the time, he had, gotten a whole stable of national brands to say, yeah, we'll go with you. So he had an amazing portfolio. So I went to work with Adam. And I, developed things like South Florida Beer Week. I did, sud-soaked bar crawls around Delray Beach, beer dinners, tap takeovers, and I focused on marketing these brands out in the field and learning more about what it takes to bring a beer to market, sales, and then met the folks at Ryan and Casey, and then sort of the rest was history from there.
What a cool pathway, right? I mean, you really got some great experience along the way to lead you into this.
I think about it as like a career lattice, right? Like you want to fill in, I think, the areas you don't know about. And sometimes that takes different, experiences and kind of moving maybe a little bit away. I think if I sometimes think, oh man, if I had, just started out in marketing and, like made a career of brand marketing when I was young, where would I be now? But I'm super happy with my experience, and I love the varied, sort of challenges I've had to face and what that's taught me. So yeah, I wouldn't trade it.
Yeah, no, it's the pathways that get you to where you are in life are always, when you're on one, then you're on another, and sometimes you don't see how they're all leading together, right? Until they do, and then you go, oh,
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, when I was in Colorado, I played in a band. I also used to, my dad let us borrow some money to record a demo, and instead we went out and bought a bunch of equipment, right? And then we would go out and run live sound, and so, I mean, I never thought that would come back to benefit me in any way, but it sure did. And that's the cool thing about life's journey, right? It leads you in a million different directions, and then slowly, as you get to a certain point in your life, the pieces start hopefully the pieces start snapping together.
Yeah.
As they have in your case. Okay, I'm a little curious aside here. As a food critic, right, in South Florida, give me a few of your favorite restaurant, any favorite restaurants, any things that you particularly, and maybe stuff that's some of the places that have stood the test of time.
Yeah, I think one of my challenges being a restaurant critic, especially when I did, right, this was like late 2000s, before 2010,
right,
was that, kind of what we were talking about earlier. I think South Florida's food scene was really borrowed. It was borrowed from elsewhere. It was behind the times, right? And so I ended up gravitating to hole in the walls and places where you could find an experience that was unlike anywhere else, that was real, that was emotional, that helped you connect with that food culture.
Right.
So I think back on my favorite places from being a critic, and they certainly weren't like the celebrity chef openings, right, and stuff like that. I wouldn't sit here and say that that's the dining experience I want now either.
Right.
When I go somewhere, I want to get something that is that has a story, that's built with passion. So some of my favorite places are that remain and that are still open. Marumi Sushi in Sunrise. Have you heard of that?
No.
Marumi Sushi is a place opened by two Japanese chefs that came from another restaurant in North Miami Beach that was really dedicated to serving sushi chefs and restaurant workers as they got off. So they would stay open till 4 a.m. and serve authentic Japanese cuisine, not tuna rolls or spicy tuna, not escalar, white tuna, not the same kind of tricolor experience you get when you go get sushi anywhere else. So these guys were serving authentic Japanese dishes, and from my experience going to Tokyo, I was like, wow, this is amazing. This reminds me of being in Tokyo. So Marumi Sushi is one place. They're still around today, and they do amazing stuff. Their menu changes all the time. I highly recommend them.
Marumi?
Marumi, yeah.
Marumi, okay.
But I would say when you go, you got to go late at night, right? And you got to and you have some drinks, and you're gonna look around and you're gonna see all the kind of sushi chefs, line cooks, everyone that works around the area. They're going there at the end of the night. Then another one that was one of my favorites that remained today, still one of my favorites, is called Bamboo Fire in Delray. They are a small mom and pop restaurant. I mean small. maybe 4 tables inside and like 3 outside, off of the Ave, right?
Okay.
Like a few blocks off the Ave in Delray. And they, it's a husband and wife, Beverly, and her husband, and they cook amazing, like Caribbean inspired, Guyanese, Trinidadian, Jamaican food, like this kind of
heat.
blend of the Caribbean. Yeah, it's got heat, it's got flavor, it's just, and it's like, it's not the, kind of Caribbean food you think about when, like, okay, you're going to go into like almost like a casual style Caribbean restaurant. They've got it kind of in warming trays, like this is like made from scratch, like with love. And what amazed me about Bamboo Fire and still does today is that, the owners are there. And when you order, they come out, they talk, they're like, the menu almost doesn't matter. You're like, what's good? And they're like, oh, we can make you some amazing okra fried rice, and we're gonna get you, some escabeche fish, and we're gonna do some curry goat, and they're taking you on this journey where you're like living this experience. You're just like, oh my God, this is amazing, and the food is incredible. So those two kind of come to mind the most. But I remember doing like a tour of roti restaurants in South Florida. And loving, that connection we have with the Caribbean that you can't find anywhere else, right? Like that's something that here in South Florida we have access to, and it's amazingly unique. And like I think more people should go like find good roti, Guyanese, Trinidadian restaurants, right, and go experience that. Jamaican food for sure. And then I think we have an amazing kind of like almost like little Koreatown, like in like Tamarack, like West Broward. Really? Where and other kind of Asian restaurants, like where you get authentic Chinese and stuff like that. And so there's just like a whole slew of places out there I think are super interesting.
I appreciate it. As I'm sitting here, I'm like, I got to write this down. Right? And I'm like, we're recording a show, you dumbass. You just watch it later.
Yeah. Hit me up anytime. I can definitely get tips.
I will. Anthony Bourdain fan?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God, absolutely. He's amazing. I think what he stood for is exactly what draws me to food, is like this idea that you're going to connect with people and cultures through what they eat, what they do every day, like what they see. That gives you like a really interesting conduit, right? Because it's so fundamental to something we all do and experience and love.
The way you were explaining these restaurants, that's why I asked the question, because I was like, okay, that's what I loved about him, was that it didn't matter if it was, Michelin 3-star or, literally like Tin Shack, out back somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. It was always about, the authenticity, the love, what really went into the preparation of that food and experience that made it special, right? Yeah. And it could be the lowest of the low, the highest. It didn't matter. It was about that real authentic experience. And I just love the way he described it, but more importantly, I love the way he paid respect to it, right? 100%. No matter where he was, he paid deep respect to it. And I can tell you have that same mindset. It's really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, he was a legend,
I agree. John, it's been great spending time with you. Thanks for coming in today.
Thanks. This was a blast. Thanks for having me, Chris. Just love the discussion and appreciate the opportunity.
You got it. Is there anything that you would like to share with our audience about the Funky Buddha? There will be some people that are not familiar, and there's some that certainly will be, but if there's any parting, words that you'd like to share with everybody about your wonderful business, now would be a good time to do.
Yeah, come see us at the tap room, Funky Buddha, the source of the funk in Oakland Park. We're off 38th and Dixie Highway in Oakland Park, and it'll definitely open your eyes. We got great food, music, beers, of course. And then, we've got, a ton of amazing products on shelf this year, including our hard seltzer. We've got some new flavors coming out. We've got Floridian, which is just a Florida classic, and then all the great beers that we put out alongside it. So appreciate it.
Awesome, John. Well, I can tell you, everybody, it's a killer place, and I think everybody would really enjoy it and really enjoy the experience they had. I know we're going to bring our crew over there again sometime soon and just try to connect more with your business as a sign of appreciation.
Can't wait.
So, John, thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
It's been great. You did awesome.
All right. Thanks, Chris.